In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you the exact reasons why some businesses grow to 10 million a year and why others struggle to scale and survive past the first few years. Now, over the last 6 years, I've worked with countless different companies, and I'll be the first to tell you that there's a massive difference between those companies that scale to 8 figures per year and the others that struggle to survive. Now, whether you're just starting out in business or you've been doing business for a while, these insights are going to help you understand what it takes to build a predictable and sustainable 8-figure business. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So the first thing that I want to touch on is the actual data behind reaching a level of 8 figures per year. Now, only out of 10,000 businesses, 1,000 make it past year 3. And out of those 1,000, 100 make it to 7 figures. And out of those 100, only 10 make it to 8 figures. So out of every 10,000 businesses, there's a 0.1% chance of you actually hitting 8 figures. And the reason why that number is so low is the biggest problem I've noticed across people that we've worked with is that usually people try to make that jump right away to 8 figures. And the thing is, your first goal as a business owner should be trying to survive even the first few years of business, because if you can do that, that puts you in a whole different percentile compared to businesses that can't get there, right? And there's going to be some rare case scenarios that you might be able to boost your business to that level of growth with the right support, team, and infrastructure. But usually for the average person, making those types of jumps is very rare. Hence why the percentage of business owners that actually get to this level is so low, right? So what is the main difference between these business owners? It's perseverance over growth. Now, it's basically this combination of defense and offense because both are important to win the game. However, the priority for a lot of these businesses when they start out that actually make it that far is preserving their growth, preserving their business, and making sure that they'll be here in the next few years to still play this game. Because once you get kicked out of the game for whatever reason, whether it's saturation or competitors come in and wipe you out, you won't be able to play the game anymore. So there's no point of aggressively trying to scale if you can't see that your business has a strong enough foundation to last that long, right? So both are important, right? Growth is also important. It's not like you have to prioritize one or the other. It's a combination. But usually these businesses that make it to that level, again, prioritize this over growth initially. And you prioritize growth secondly, right? Now, there's various factors that go into this, and I'm going to break down each one that I've noticed over the years, right? So the first one that we'll talk about is evolving and staying relevant. Now, this is really important because I've seen a lot of business owners, for example, and this can be clearly demonstrated by your goal, right? I've seen and spoken to many people that usually come to me and they're like, hey, I don't want to grow that aggressively to 8 figures per year. That's not the type of business I want to build. I'm happy with making anywhere from 1 to 5 million a year. And I'm good with that. I don't want the extra headache. I don't want this. And that's totally fine. To each their own. Every business owner has their own individual mission, goals, whatever you want to kind of frame it as, right? And then there's also people that obviously want to scale past 10 plus million a year. And they want to find a roadmap for that. The reason why I use this example is just because you have a lower goal and you, let's just say, believe that 10 million is something that you don't want to do because of the extra work and kind of, things that you have to really incorporate, you still have to stay relevant and stick around in the market to even do this every single year. Right? Just because you want to aim lower doesn't mean you can stop evolving and staying relevant, because there is going to be someone else that comes in and takes up this market share. Or there might be a swing that happens in the market condition that a business that was once performing and doing 1 million or 2 or 3 a year isn't anymore. And that is going to get sliced down by 50% because we thought that the only thing we needed to do was maintain the same level of performance, whether it was through marketing, whether it's through sales, whether it was through fulfillment, whatever it might be, over the years to just keep repeating and doing this, right? There's oxygen in the room every year you start a business. And if you're not pumping enough oxygen back in and you're not keeping yourself afloat and constantly figuring out how to take back market share and how to take more market share, even if you want to stay at this level, you need to make sure that you have those things kind of, stored in the back pocket, right? So that's one of the bigger things that I've noticed. A lot of people don't really prioritize that. And even business owners that are doing or aiming to do 10 million a year, usually they'll have, probably a slow start and they'll have that 1 year where things spike up, but they'll probably plateau or they stop doing the things that once took them from this break here and allowed them to have that spike. Because usually every time there's a spike or a growth or an outbreak in your business, it's not because of the thing that you did yesterday. It's usually because of the thing that you did maybe 6 to 12 months ago that allowed you to grow in this moment and this atmosphere. That's always been the case. And so those businesses that think ahead and those founders that prioritize evolution and making sure that they're ahead of the curve, ahead of the competition, will always have an advantage to reaching that level of 10 million plus per year, right? The second thing ties down to this as well, right? And that's the 0 to 1 phase, which I believe a lot of business owners usually skip. Again, because many business owners come with the mindset of growth first, again, which is important, but timing and sequential order of when to prioritize things is what differentiates a lot of these businesses. Now, the 0 to 1 phase is usually the phase that probably takes the longest. And the reason why is because during this time period, you have to figure out your ICP, who's your ideal client, right? Who are you selling to? You have to nail your proof of concept or your MVP of your product to actually make sure that it works and it drives results. And you actually have to make sure that people and business owners or whatever, whether you're B2C or B2B, are getting results and giving you the feedback you need to actually get to that next level. And because many people try to skip this and they jump straight to growth and try to do a launch and try to make as much money as they can, usually they'll notice that spike. But because they skipped this 0 to 1 phase, which was requiring them to figure out a lot of the foundational work that seemed boring or irrelevant at the time because the only goal was financial and monetary, the thing that happens is you have that growth initially in the business, and then after every single spike comes that kind of decline, right? And usually that decline, if you don't have this figured out, comes all the way back down to 0, and you just started back to where you were a few months ago. So throughout this process, have you made some money? Probably. But does this help you build the foundations you need to get to an 8-figure level? Definitely not, right? So I emphasize this a lot because just because you can do something shouldn't mean to jump right into it, right? And everyone wants to skip this boring phase and go straight from 1 to 100 and start marketing, start building a sales team, start building up a marketing engine. And those are all great initiatives to take to grow the business. But without these kind of processes in place and these nodes that actually help you nail the right foundations, you're only going to be 1 foot wide and 10 foot deep, right? And usually you want to make sure that you have a wide enough spectrum and a wide enough runway with the right foundations and the right things to actually take off and predictably grow month over month and year over year. And if you do try to avoid this stage, I haven't seen a business that reached a level of 10 million a year that was allowed to skip this. You're always going to have to eventually stop what you're doing, no matter how fast you're growing, and you're going to have to circle back to that initial phase. So it's one of those things that you just can't avoid. And if you try to, and you're growing for maybe, let's just say 6 months, 12 months, and things have been rocking solid, that's amazing. But if you are doing that and you initially launched, you might want to take a step back and make sure that try to maintain the growth you have, but also work on these things, because if you don't, when you have that runway and when you have that gap or cushion in your business, it's always going to bite you in the back, right? And so probably one of the more important parts, and maybe I'll make a video that dives more deep specifically into this, because this phase alone may take you 3, 6, even 9 months to nail and dial in, and it never usually stops. You always have to keep this phase and the foundational phase of your product, who you're selling to, over and over and over again, because the minute you stop refining this, you lose a sense of touch in your marketing and your sales, and you'll notice it impacting across your entire business, right? So the third thing that comes pretty common with a lot of these business owners is reputation. They prioritize their reputation over everything else. They aren't going to trade a dollar value for this thing here, because no amount of time or dollar value is ever going to help you get this back once you lose it. And it's been a common pattern I've seen. A lot of business owners will prioritize the short term over the long term effect of what they can potentially grow into. And I think sometimes this short sights us, because as much as we want to take that action or whatever it is, because we know that it's going to help us maybe jump a few steps and scale further immediately, what that might prevent us from is maybe a potential exit at the end of the day, or it might even impact the next business that you potentially will start. I'll give you a very simple example of this, right? Many online businesses, especially, use Stripe to process payments. And anyone in this kind of age in 2025, if you know Stripe, they have an iron fist when it comes to processing payments for digital products. And they're trying to step away from that industry, or at least moderate that industry very heavily. Now, although that could be a good thing, what that makes business owners do is really be careful of making sure that they have a very low dispute or refund rate. And usually, and again, this ties into the thing that we just discussed up here with 0 to 1, if you don't have this figured out, if you don't have a proof of concept, and if you don't have reviews, and if you don't have people actually raving and caring about what you do, that initial phase, what may end up happening is you might not meet people exactly what you promised them for and deliver the results or whatever it might be. And that might cause an uptick in refunds and disputes, which will probably get you, let's just say, blacklisted with Stripe, right? Now, I'm sure, and I know because we've dealt with this, many business owners will try to find an alternative or a workaround. Now, what ends up happening is that's fine, because you'll still get through the season. It's not like your business will shut down because, there are other payment providers and options out there. However, let's just say in a couple of years, you decide to stop this business and start something completely different in a completely different industry or vertical. Not having a payment processor like Stripe can be something that comes in your way and bites you then. So sometimes it's not the consequences that we see at the first level that are actually the ones that we want to think about when we're building something like this in a company of 8 figures. It's actually the second and third order consequences that we might not see coming today, but we're basically planting the seed for them to happen in the foreseeable future. And let's just say you're not even trying to start another business, but maybe you're trying to build a business on the back end of your very first business. This is still going to be something that probably is going to affect you then. And it's going to probably halt your growth or not allow you to grow at the speed or level you want to, right? And again, there's workarounds these situations, but this is just one baseline example of some things that most business owners kind of don't look at, and it kind of comes back and haunts them, right? But to say the very least, it's one of those things that can prevent you from stepping into new rooms, making those connections that can probably help you tap into different markets. And, it can really be the make or break between a business that survives versus a business that makes it past 7 or even 8 figures per year, right? The fourth thing is usually a lot of these founders, a lot of these business owners that reach this point are first movers. They're unique and they know how to stand out in their market. Now, usually you'll notice, and if you've ever experienced something like this where you did something and you came up with the idea or the strategy or the initiative, once you start something, every one of your competitors, especially in the online space because you're very visible, they will immediately try to replicate it, right? And a prime example of this is, for example, YouTube. I think a lot of people started, doing YouTube, and they started to, copy each other in a sense of, oh, this person got 100K views on this video. Let me try to mimic the same thumbnail title or editing style or setup version to help me get to that level, right? And sometimes it might work, sometimes it doesn't. The point is, usually when you do something that works, people will come. Your competition will want to rip your clothes off, and they're going to want to take a piece of the pie you have. That's just nature of business. You have to kind of play the game, and this is where being offensive kicks in, right? Now, usually the business owners that are wise enough to know this, they'll probably do something knowing with the intention that someone else or the market is going to replicate this, and this one thing isn't going to work probably a couple months from now, right? And so these businesses are already plotting or strategizing the next thing while everyone else is still fixated on that thing that was just kind of working in the moment. And it might be working for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, depending on whatever it might be. But usually everything has a decline. What goes up must comes down. It's just in the universal law of business and life. And so nothing lasts forever. And these business owners know that. And rather than being on the other end of the stick trying to play catch up, you want to be the business that builds that cushion initially and that space between your market and yourself. And with that space you have, you want to leverage it to really strategize and be unique with your marketing, with your sales, the positioning of your business, because that's the only time you'll have. And if you let that time go by, and again, this kind of is a thread that ties from the first thing we talked about to now of staying relevant. If you don't evolve, the chances of you staying relevant are very slim, or at least will go down, right? And so it's very important to know that standing out and being unique not only will help you be perceived very differently to your market, but it'll also separate you from business owners that are competing in this bloody water, and you'll be kind of in your own lane essentially, which is a better kind of place to compete and be in if you're in this game rather than competing with one another at a very low level. And ultimately comes down to how you want to fixate that. But I would assume many business owners would like to have their own kind of area and not compete with low level and low tiered businesses that are just scrambling to get by month over month. The fifth thing, systems, team, organization. You'll be amazed how many business owners might be doing really well, and they might not have any sort of system or SOP or processes in place to really help them streamline their work and grow to that next stage. Now, these are more so those boring things you want to say that we might not look at the first thing that comes to mind when it comes to scaling a business, because the first thing we'll probably look at is marketing or sales or what content strategy is going to drive the most leads, which is the more fun stuff, if you want to call it. And this is the more, I guess, the boring back end structure of the business. But the stronger of an organization you have from day one, and this is another misconception I feel like a lot of business owners have, is thinking that they don't need to prioritize this until they reach a certain level, which is just a bad, unhealthy mindset. Because if you're not prepared for the growth you're expecting, you're not going to get that growth anyway. And so it's super important from day one, you start out with the right infrastructure that allows you to grow this company to that next level, right? Whether it's stuff that you're tracking, right? And this is something that's so common that I see across business owners. And you'll be surprised. Some of these business owners might be doing multiple six figures per month, and they might be very healthy from a P&L sheet. But behind that, when you look at it, you can see that if this keeps happening, the chances of you maintaining that growth will trickle down. The other thing is, by having things like these incorporated into your business, you start to become a more valuable asset rather than just a random business. And what I mean by that is, the one example, again, tracking data is one thing that I see many business owners lack using, right? How many customers you get per month, how many, leads came in this month, how many people visited your website. They're probably, if you ask an average business owner, some of them that might be even doing a few million per year, they won't know those numbers. And so for us, for example, every Sunday, all the businesses that we manage and clients we work with, on Sundays for us, we sit down and we audit and we look at those data points, those metrics per department, operations, HR, marketing, sales, you name it. And each department has its own metrics, and we track those metrics accordingly. And whoever's responsible for those metrics is supposed to fill those out by Sunday. And based on that data, we'll probably make the next decisions. So the thing to take away from this is, when you're at this level, you can't be making decisions off a whim or your gut intuition. If you want to scale to a level where you're doing $1 million per month plus, you need to know your numbers. You need to know where you exactly stand, where your blind spots are, what your weaknesses are in your business, because there will be weaknesses. And if you don't think there are, then that's probably a bad start already. And so by having this data, you're able to make decisions that are proven, and you're not doing the wrong kind of tasks or work. And so energy and prioritizing your time is a big thing that many business owners don't really really have the skill set to do, right? Just knowing what the right task that is going to move the most needle for you is probably going to be one of the most simplest things that most of these business owners probably won't have. This is just one example of why systems, having a team and organization around you, is going to allow you to grow. Now, touching on the team part a little bit, if you're stuck as a business owner doing those nitty-gritty tasks in the business, and what I will say too is, when you start the business, and even when the business is growing, you still want to have a very clear pulse check on what's going on. And so I usually recommend, for example, when a business owner is starting to launch a new business, to do the sales calls themselves. Tap in with the marketing department yourself. Know the full operational flow. Know all these back-end things that are holding up your business. You never want to be running blind and not knowing what's going on, because the minute you lose pulse on your business, if you scale too rapidly, you're not going to understand where you even stand in the business, right? So if we look at an org chart, let's just say you're the T1 role at the top, and you have managers, let's just say, in the middle. For example, this is a common pattern I noticed that happens, is usually there's managers, and then underneath the managers, there'll probably be those tier 3 people that are more so, I guess, the people that actually execute the work. That might be a copywriter, might be a salesperson, whatever it might be. Now, once you add a managerial layer for someone at the T1 level, if you don't keep a pulse check with these employees or people on your team here, you've lost sight of what's going on. Usually you're not going to understand the best things. You're probably maybe getting an end of week report from these people, but you're not knowing what actually is driving that report. So when you speak to these people on the front lines that actually are doing the work, they'll be able to give you the most insight that you probably yourself can never have, right? Now, obviously, when you're starting at the T3 level, you're doing the work yourself, you're doing the management yourself if you start hiring some people. And then if you start hiring managers, you'll have to start managing the managers, right? And so this kind of food chain starts building up. And if you build it too fast and you don't know what's going on, there starts to be this disconnect between you as the founder, because you might have one vision, but your team doesn't see that vision, or they might not be able to relate to that vision, and they're not going to be able to help you get there. The opposite end of the spectrum is, let's just say you have trouble delegating. So I know a lot of business owners that do really well and they're a solo founder, right? They're a one-person team and they do a few million a year, which is amazing, right? But to get to a level of 8 figures, you are going to need a team, whether it's small or big, depending on what your goals and industry you're in. You're going to need a team to help you. And if you're still doing the T3 tasks at this level, now you're doing yourself a disservice, because you're not allowing yourself to focus on the tasks that are actually going to help you move to the next level. Again, when you're doing well, you have a cushion. You want to utilize that cushion to help you build for the next stage. If you're stuck doing the low-level tasks that aren't worth your time anymore, and you're not focusing on this, you're literally subtracting the years and months and days you have left for your business's lifespan, because you're not being creative, you're not thinking outside the box. And that's probably one of the most kind of useful and high leverage things a founder could do, is spend time learning. For example, right now AI is on the rise, and those business owners that learn how to adapt it and incorporate it into their team, they're going to be able to be prepared for 2026 and 2027. And if they don't, they're going to fall short, right? So this is going to be a big wave, and we're going to notice this in front of our eyes over these next few months and years, where AI is going to kick in. So huge kind of factor in what usually I think separates, and this is the borderline. This is what usually drawbacks founders from scaling to that next level. And all these other things that we talked about come before this, in my opinion. But this is the drawback that I see with across multiple founders and businesses that we've worked with. This is what usually prevents them from taking it to that next extreme, right? Now, the final thing, and I think this is important to make all of the above work together, and that's reinventing yourself as a founder. Now, I'm huge on self-development and actually putting myself through the things that I preach and talk about on this channel, to my clients, whatever it might be, to our workers. Now, this is a constant thing that I feel like many business owners, and just like I mentioned here, when they have that cushion and they have that space to grow, they don't prioritize it, right? And I'll give you an example. Like, for an instance, this last year, 2024, was probably the busiest year for us. Good problem to have. However, I remember when I started, I used to be a lot more creative, because the first years in business, the first 2 years in our business, we had work, but I was almost a solo founder. I had maybe 1 or 2 people helping me here and there. And I had a lot of creative bandwidth, meaning I was learning pretty actively. I was figuring out how to evolve. I was trying to know all these things that we talked about today. I had a cushion, and I wanted to make sure I can leverage that cushion to keep growing. Then when year 3 came around, year 3 and 4, we got a little bit more busier, right? And because at the time I didn't equip the skills of hiring a team, having operations, having those systems, I was scrambling to learn those things. I was scrambling to manage people. I was having a tough time delegating tasks, because I felt that no one that I hire could do a good enough job as me. And that's something I had to work on over the years to get to the point today where now we have a team that actually I can trust to do maybe even a better job than me, right? And so those were all mental blocks that came in my way. And so if I didn't reinvent myself, and one thing I'll notice, if you notice here, my times that I had available to actually learn about the other things that are going outside of my business and industry, which I think many people under leverage this thing, is they look too closely inside of just their industry. And one thing I've been always proactive about since day one is, even from a marketing and sales point of view, I always try to be different for ourselves, different for our clients and people that we work with. I never wanted to be a client, in the shoes of someone that wanted to just replicate what someone else was doing. And I think that's fine for a short period of time. But if you keep doing that, you have nothing substantial here. And you want to be, again, one of those first movers that we mentioned earlier in this video. And so I would literally, look at the SaaS industry. I'd look at, businesses outside that are brick and mortar, that are service-based businesses, whatever it might be. I would look outside these different industries to gather inspiration. And then what happens is usually you formulate this kind of pattern, these different dots that kind of intersect with one another. And at the middle of that, once all these dots intersect, it kind of creates this own unique kind of formula. And you can take that and incorporate it into your business. And so I was actively learning here because I had more time. But then when all of this stuff came into the equation, I had less and less time to learn. And one thing that I had to get better at over here was time management and energy management. I needed to be more particular about what I worked on, what things I prioritized, and I also needed to still make room on my calendar to proactively learn, right? And I forced myself, for example, to go to masterminds once a month or once a quarter at the very least, to just make sure I'm learning and I'm staying at the top of my game. Because if I'm not able to stay at the top of my game, I'm not going to be able to lead a team to function at the top of their game. I'm not going to be able to advise our clients to be able to perform at the top level. And so for me, this was one of those things that I had to forcefully include into my schedule. And it's probably one of the most fun parts for me personally, was to just keep learning, right? And the best founders I know, they make sure that they actively leave room for themselves to reinvent who they are, because the person you are today is not the person that's going to allow you to get to that higher level you're looking to get to, right? And so you will constantly, at each level and each stage of your business, you will need to make sure that you are constantly evolving and reinventing yourself. And I noticed this with, honestly, it's crazy to say, but some of the smartest people usually are the ones that get in their own way. I've worked with clients who some of them just blindly trust us, which is, I think, because of the reputation we've built, and we're able to move at such crazy speeds. Whereas in other clients might need a little bit more kind of nurturing and a little bit more mindset training, because they need to rewire their way of thinking to reach that next breakthrough. And until they do that, everything we talked about today does not apply, right? Because if you can't reinvent yourself and make sure that you're a better leader, founder, you're not going to be able to get to a point of a company that constantly grows year over year and produces 10 million a year, all right? So what I want to do is I want to wrap this up, because at the beginning of this video, I said this could be applicable to anyone at any stage, right? So maybe someone that's just starting out you may be asking to yourself, well, this is all great, but like, where do I start, right? If you're, let's just say making 6 figures per month, or, you're doing $1 million a year and you're doing pretty healthy. The best thing I kind of wire everything back to is I say, try to look for your first launch pad. Every business, in my opinion, has their own launch pad. That's when you kind of have that lucky break and you're able to have that cushion, or you're able to have that big spike of growth. And usually with big spikes of growth comes with buyback. You earn time, you earn more longevity in your space. And so when you have more time on your hand, that's when you want to work towards building things to that next level. Being creative, coming up with strategy, whatever it might be, all the things that we talked about earlier today. Now, what I notice, and I'll give you an example for this, for example, is that many business owners believe that, this is a marketing example, is that with organic alone, they can get to a point of reaching a business of doing 10 million plus a year. And when I say organic, I mean like organic traffic, right? Now, I will be the first to say too, there are some exceptions where there are some brands that can organically do this. But for the majority here, many people won't be able to reach a level of doing 10 million plus in revenue if they don't incorporate paid, right? And this goes back to what we talked about earlier about reinventing yourself and going through those mental breakthroughs. This is usually a prime example of something that we have to work with, clients on, and we have to, not say jump into paid right away. But if you're doing well here organically, you want to be able to first, honestly, maximize organic as much as you can. Build those foundations like we talked about first that allow you to scale to that next level. But eventually, there's going to come a point in your growth right here where you have to pause and you have to really ask yourself, if we're going to take this business further, we're going to need to tap into more traffic. And if we're doing the same thing we're doing right now with our content and the strategy or whatever it might be, you can see the trajectory of your growth. It's not going to sustain the level that you can grow into. Now, if you sit around and you're going to wait until this thing cracks one day and it's going to spike up, that's totally fine. But what might happen is you're on finite energy and time. You don't have enough time, because by the time you figure it out, the market will change and the thing you figured out is no longer relevant or going to be able to move the needle for you. And so it's really important for us to understand that we need to, when we have that leverage, when we have that cushion, you want to work towards the next thing. So if a company, for example, is doing well organically, amazing. But what you want to start exploring is, what would it take for us to get to the next level? Maybe you need to incorporate paid advertising at one point in time. Maybe it's not today. Maybe it's 6 months from now. Maybe it's a year from now. But the fact that you already start thinking about those things will put you at a much bigger edge. That, in one example, is a launch pad. Now, you may have a different variation of this, but the first thing you want to do is build that launch pad or find it or come across it. And usually this will just come through you working and you intersecting with, I guess you want to call it, our luck vertical here, where there's variables in our life that you can control, in our business that you can control, and then there's business variables that you can't control, right? And so you have to keep showing up, you have to keep trying, you have to keep doing those things that's allowing you to grow, and then eventually every business has some sort of breakthrough. And when you have those breakthroughs, that's your launch pad. And you want to leverage that launch pad to make sure that you're able to buy yourself more time, more market share, and be able to stand out as a brand as a result of this, and make sure that you're equipping yourself with the right things to grow to that next level. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll leave it at that for now. There's many variables in this video, and I know there's different nodes. If there's anything that you want me to go much more deeper on, just leave it in the comments below, and I'll be sure to make a video on that soon. But yeah, until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.